It started with Sundays. Sundays were supposed to be our day, a day to relax, to reconnect, to be together, but over time they became something else entirely. Linda, my wife, would leave early in the morning, dressed in her sharp office clothes, saying she had to catch up on work. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was always dedicated to her job, and I admired her ambition. She'd kiss me goodbye, her lips brushing mine in a way that felt routine, almost mechanical, and then she'd be out the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I'd watch her go, sipping my coffee, telling myself it was just a phase. She'd been working harder lately, taking on more responsibilities at the office, and I wanted to be supportive. But as the weeks went by, something about those Sundays began to gnaw at me. It wasn't just the early mornings or the late returns. It was the little things, the subtle shifts in her behavior that I couldn't quite put my finger on. She'd come home looking flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, her makeup touched up but not quite right. She'd avoid my eyes, brushing off my questions with vague answers. "Just a busy day at the office," she'd say, her voice tight, her body tense as she slipped past me to the shower. I'd hear the water running, and I'd sit there, staring at the TV without really seeing it, my mind racing. Why did she always shower as soon as she got home? Why did she smell faintly of cologne that wasn't mine? I'd told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. Linda had always been loyal, or at least I thought she had. We'd been married for 8 years, and while things hadn't been perfect, I'd never doubted her love for me. But now doubt crept in like a shadow, growing darker with every passing Sunday. I tried to push it away, to focus on the good moments we still had, the dinners we shared, the way she'd laugh at my jokes, the way she'd curl up next to me on the couch. But even those moments felt strained, like she was only half present, her mind somewhere far away. One Sunday, I decided to test the waters. I asked her if she wanted to spend the day together, just the two of us. I suggested a picnic in the park, something we hadn't done in years. She hesitated, her eyes darting to her phone before she forced a smile and said, "Maybe next week. I've got so much to catch up on at work." Her tone was light, but there was an edge to it, a defensiveness that made my stomach twist. I nodded, pretending to understand, but inside I felt a pang of hurt. Work had always been important to her, but it had never come before us, not like this. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through her phone. I hadn't planned to. I'd always respected her privacy, but something inside me snapped. I needed answers. Her phone was locked, of course, but I noticed she'd changed her passcode recently. She used to use our anniversary, but now it was something else. Something I couldn't guess. I put the phone down, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. Was I becoming the kind of husband who snooped through his wife's things? The thought made me sick, but so did the idea of being lied to. The next Sunday, I paid closer attention. She left early as usual, but this time I noticed the way she lingered in front of the mirror, applying her lipstick with extra care. She was wearing the perfume I'd bought her for her birthday, the one she said was her favorite, but she only wore it on Sundays now, never during the week. I watched her from the doorway, my chest tightening as she smoothed her dress and grabbed her bag. "Have a good day," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You too," she replied, and then she was gone. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, trying to distract myself with chores and errands. But my mind kept circling back to Linda, to the way she'd been acting, to the things I couldn't ignore anymore. By the time she came home that evening, I was a mess. She walked in, her heels in one hand, her hair slightly messy, and I felt a surge of anger and fear. "How was work?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She froze for a moment, then shrugged. "Busy," she said, avoiding my gaze. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed." I watched her walk away, my heart pounding. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. But I didn't know what to do. Confronting her felt risky. What if I was wrong? What if I was pushing her away by accusing her of something she hadn't done? But the alternative, staying silent, pretending everything was fine, felt just as dangerous. I was trapped, caught between my love for her and the growing suspicion that she was hiding something from me. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. I needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. The first real crack in my trust came on a quiet Sunday evening. Linda had left her phone on the kitchen counter, something she never did. She was always so careful with it, keeping it close, locking it the moment she set it down. But that night, she'd been distracted, rushing to answer a call before disappearing into the bathroom. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally at least, but when the phone buzzed, the screen lit up and my eyes were drawn to it like a moth to a flame. A message from someone named Mark popped up. "Today was incredible. Can't wait for next Sunday." My heart sank. Mark was her boss. I knew him, or at least I thought I did. He was married, with kids, and always seemed professional whenever I saw him at company events. But this message felt wrong. The tone was too familiar, too intimate. My mind raced as I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Who was Mark to her? What did this mean? I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but deep down I knew better. The pit in my stomach grew heavier, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of doubt. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there, staring at her phone, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want to ask. When she came out of the bathroom, I handed her the phone without a word, my face carefully neutral. She took it, her eyes flickering to the screen for a split second before she tucked it into her pocket. "Thanks," she said, her voice casual, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside I was falling apart. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. It played on a loop in my mind, taunting me, tormenting me. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that it was just a harmless comment between colleagues. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Why would her boss text her on a Sunday? Why would he say something like that? And why did Linda seem so on edge whenever I brought up work? I started noticing things I hadn't before. Little details that seemed insignificant on their own, but added up to something much bigger. The way she'd smile at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she typed out a response. The way she'd dress up on Sundays, wearing lingerie I hadn't seen in years, her outfits more polished, more deliberate. The way she'd come home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine, a scent that lingered on her skin no matter how many times she showered. One night, I found myself standing in front of her closet, staring at the rows of clothes she'd carefully arranged. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt compelled to search, to find something. Anything that would either confirm my fears or put them to rest. My hands trembled as I reached for a dress she'd worn recently, a sleek black number she'd bought for a work event. I held it up, my eyes scanning the fabric for what stains. Smudges I didn't even know, but as I ran my fingers over the material, I noticed something tucked into the pocket. A receipt from a hotel downtown, dated just a few days ago. My heart stopped. The receipt was crumpled, as if she'd tried to hide it, but it was unmistakable. The name of the hotel, the date, the time, it all lined up with one of her late Sundays. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, the air rushing out of my lungs as I stared at the piece of paper in my hand. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. This was proof that Linda had been lying to me, that she'd been sneaking around, that she'd been with someone else. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. Instead, I carefully folded the receipt and put it back where I'd found it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage it. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like the life I'd built with Linda was crumbling around me and I was powerless to stop it. The next Sunday, I decided to follow her. I told myself I was being crazy, that I was crossing a line, but I had to know. I had to see it for myself. I trailed her car as she left the house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She drove downtown, her movements confident, like she'd done this 100 times before. My stomach churned as I watched her pull into the parking lot of the same hotel from the receipt. I parked a few spaces away, my heart pounding as I watched her walk inside, her heels clicking on the pavement, and then I saw him, Mark. He was waiting for her in the lobby, his hand resting on the small of her back as they disappeared into the elevator. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, the betrayal cutting deeper than I could have imagined. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, was cheating on me with her boss. The reality of it hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me gasping for air, my mind reeling with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I sat there in my car, staring at the hotel entrance, my hands trembling on the wheel. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to storm inside, to confront them, to demand answers. But another part of me was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to process what I'd just seen. In the end, I drove home, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The truth was out there now, staring me in the face, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. But knowing the truth didn't make it any easier to bear. If anything, it made it worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Over the next few weeks, the weight of what I'd discovered pressed down on me like a stone, suffocating me. I tried to act normal, to go about my days as if nothing had changed, but it was impossible. Every time I looked at Linda, I saw the lie in her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze, the way she flinched when I touched her. It was like living with a stranger, someone who wore my wife's face but wasn't her anymore. I started paying closer attention to her habits, her routines, searching for more clues, more proof. It wasn't healthy, I knew that, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to know the full extent of what was going on, even if it destroyed me. I noticed how she'd leave her phone face down on the table, how she'd quickly close her laptop when I walked into the room. She was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what it was. One evening, while she was in the shower, I made my move. Her laptop was on the kitchen table, the screen dark but still on. My heart raced as I opened it, my fingers trembling as I typed in her password, our dog's name, something she'd used for years. The screen lit up, and there it was, an open email thread between her and Mark. My stomach churned as I read through the messages, each one more damning than the last. They weren't just flirting, they were planning. Dates, times, places. It was all there, laid out in black and white, a roadmap of their affair. I felt sick, my vision blurring as I scrolled through the emails. There were photos, too, selfies they'd sent each other, intimate and explicit. I couldn't look away, even though every image felt like a knife to the heart. Linda, my Linda, smiling at the camera in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in months. Mark's arm around her, his lips pressed to her neck. It was too much. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I felt like I was drowning, the truth pulling me under, suffocating me. When Linda came out of the shower, I was sitting at the table, the laptop in front of me. She froze when she saw it, her eyes widening in panic. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight, her hands clutching the towel around her. I didn't answer, I just stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. She looked guilty, scared, and for a moment I thought she might confess. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. "You went through my laptop," she demanded, her voice rising. "How could you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was turning this around on me, making me the bad guy. "How could I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "How could you, Linda? How could you do this to us?" She didn't answer, she just stood there, her face pale, her eyes darting around the room like she was looking for an escape. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand how much she'd hurt me. But I couldn't. Instead, I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and walked out of the room. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought about everything, the emails, the photos, the way she'd looked at me when I confronted her. I thought about the life we'd built together, the promises we'd made, the future we'd planned. It was all a lie. Everything I thought I knew about us, about her, was a lie. I felt empty, hollowed out by the betrayal, like there was nothing left of me but a shell. The next morning, Linda tried to talk to me. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Her words felt meaningless, like she was reading from a script. It didn't mean anything, she continued, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, my stomach turning at her touch. I love you, I swear I do. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just a mistake, a moment of weakness that we could move past. But I couldn't. The images from the emails were burned into my mind, a constant reminder of what she'd done. How long, I asked, my voice hoarse. She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. A few months, she admitted, her voice breaking. It started at a work event we were drinking, and it just happened. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. A few months. She'd been lying to me for months, sneaking around, betraying me in the worst possible way. In the hotel, I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded, her tears spilling over. It was only a few times, she said, her voice pleading. I swear, it didn't mean anything. I was stupid, I was selfish, but I love you. Please believe me. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to give her another chance. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the emails, the photos, the truth, knew I couldn't. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. But I wasn't sure it could be fixed. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too fresh. As I sat there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The life we'd built together was gone, replaced by something dark and broken. And I didn't know if I had the strength to pick up the pieces. The days after the confrontation were a blur. I moved out of the bedroom, unable to sleep next to her, unable to even look at her without feeling a surge of anger and pain. The house felt like a prison, every room filled with memories that now felt tainted, every corner a reminder of what I'd lost. I spent my nights on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. How could she do this? How could she throw away everything we had for what? A fling? A moment of excitement? It didn't make sense, and yet it had happened. The proof was there in the emails and the photos and the way she couldn't even look me in the eye. Linda tried to talk to me, to explain, to apologize. She'd sit on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes red from crying. I'm sorry, she'd say, over and over again like a broken record. I never meant to hurt you. I love you. Please believe me. But her words felt hollow, empty. How could I believe her when she'd lied to me for months? How could I trust her when she'd betrayed me in the worst possible way? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to give her another chance. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the truth, knew I couldn't. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. Every time I looked at her, I saw Mark's hands on her, his lips on her skin. I saw the emails, the photos, the lies. It was like a movie playing on a loop in my mind, tormenting me, taunting me. I couldn't escape it no matter how hard I tried. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left, driving aimlessly through the streets. My mind a whirlwind of emotions. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house. Not with her, not with the memories. I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town, a dingy little place with flickering neon lights and paper-thin walls. It wasn't much, but it was better than home. At least here, I could breathe. The next morning, Linda called. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to talk to her, to hear her voice, to listen to her apologies. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out what I wanted. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, if I could ever trust her again. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too fresh. A few days later, I went back to the house. I didn't want to, but I had to. I needed to get some things, to figure out what to do next. Linda was there, sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and maybe she hadn't. I didn't care. I couldn't care, not anymore. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. I just stood there, my arms crossed, my jaw clenched. "I know I messed up," she continued, her tears spilling over. "I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I love you, I swear I do. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, to make it right." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could move past this, that we could rebuild what we'd lost. But I couldn't. The trust was gone, and without trust, there was nothing. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," she whispered, "but please, don't give up on us. Not yet. We can fix this." "I know we can." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I didn't know if we could fix it, if we could ever go back to the way things were. The betrayal was too big, too painful. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss, and I didn't know if I had the strength to step back. In the end, I left. I couldn't stay, not with her, not in that house. I needed space, time to think, to figure out what I wanted. But as I drove away, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The life we'd built together was gone, replaced by something dark and broken. And I didn't know if I had the strength to pick up the pieces. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I moved out of the house, unable to stay in a place that felt so suffocating, so haunted by memories of what had been and what could never be again. Linda and I were living separate lives now, orbiting each other like distant planets, close enough to feel the pull, but too far to touch. She tried to reach out, to bridge the gap between us, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every text, every call, every attempt at reconciliation felt like salt in a wound that refused to heal. I threw myself into work, into anything that could distract me from the ache in my chest, but no matter how busy I kept myself, the thoughts always found a way in. I'd be in the middle of a meeting, and suddenly I'd see her face, her smile, her laugh, the way she used to look at me before everything fell apart. And then, just as quickly, the image would shift, replaced by the emails, the photos, the truth of what she'd done. It was like a switch I couldn't turn off, a cycle of longing and anger that left me exhausted. Linda didn't give up. She sent letters, long, handwritten pages filled with apologies and promises. She swore she'd ended things with Mark, that she'd quit her job, that she was willing to do whatever it took to fix us. She begged for another chance, for the opportunity to prove she could be the woman I'd fallen in love with. I read every word, my heart breaking all over again, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. The trust was gone, and without it, her words felt hollow, empty. One evening, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, her face pale, her eyes pleading. "Please," she said, her voice trembling, "just talk to me, let me explain, let me try to make this right." I wanted to say no, to shut the door and walk away, but something in her expression stopped me. She looked broken, shattered in a way I'd never seen before. And despite everything, I still cared about her. I still loved her, even if that love was buried under layers of pain and betrayal. I let her in, and we sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between us feeling like a chasm. She talked for what felt like hours, her voice raw with emotion. She told me how sorry she was, how much she regretted what she'd done. She admitted that she'd been selfish, that she'd let her insecurities and her need for validation lead her down a path she never should have taken. "I wasn't thinking," she said, her tears falling freely. "I was stupid, and I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I love you. I've always loved you. And if you can find it in your heart to give me another chance, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." I listened, my chest tight, my hands clenched into fists. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her in my arms and pretend none of this had ever happened. But the other part of me, the part that had been broken by her betrayal, couldn't let go of the pain. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," she said softly, "but please, don't give up on us. Not yet. We can fix this. I know we can." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know if we could fix it, if we could ever go back to the way things were. The betrayal was too big, too painful. It had changed everything, and I didn't know if I had the strength to rebuild what had been lost. In the end, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't one I made lightly, but I knew I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies, no matter how much I still loved her. The day the papers were finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that it was over, that I could finally start to move on, and sorrow for the life we'd lost, for the future we'd never have. Linda didn't fight it. She signed the papers without argument, her hands shaking as she handed them back to me. "I'm sorry," she said, one last time, her voice breaking. "For everything." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. There was nothing left to say. Now, months later, I'm still picking up the pieces. Some days are easier than others. Some days I feel like I'm finally starting to heal, to move forward, but other days the pain comes rushing back, sharp and unrelenting. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what happened, if I'll ever be able to trust someone again, but I'm trying. I'm learning to live with the scars, to find strength in the broken places, and maybe, someday, I'll find love again. But for now, I'm learning to love myself, to rebuild my life one day at a time. It's not the future I'd planned, but it's mine, and that's enough.